This is Don Boesch, and this video provides a personal background and my perspective as an instructor for the course Science for Marine Environmental Management. In this brief video, what I hope to do is to provide an overview of my career and my evolution as an environmental scientist and a science advisor. Hope this will set the stage for discussions throughout the course of the tricks of the trade I've learned. And it should help you to understand why my perspectives sometimes differ from my co-instructor, Bill Dennison. I started off my scientific career in Benthic Ecology. I was always attracted to the diverse life that lives in the ocean, but particularly at the seabed and below the seabed. And I'm still fascinated with this today. So my research dealt with the zonation of estuarine communities from the ocean to freshwater environments, looking at the structure, composition of benthic organisms and how they change over that gradient. I also got involved in applying the information about community structure and diversity to practical applications of assessing the impacts of marine pollution. When I went away to Australia to work on estuaries there for a year on a postdoc, when I came back to the Chesapeake Bay region in 1972, Tropical Storm Agnes had just occurred and had huge impacts throughout the Bay region. So studied those, the impacts on benthic communities, and led to increased understanding of the role hypoxia, oxygen depletion was paying on the regulation of those communities, but also how the effects of the storm had affected the seagrasses throughout the bay. This effect and the lingering effect that took place over many, many years led us to understand that there were broader scale problems that were affecting the bay as a result of activities in the watershed, and provided really the basis of how we're approaching the bay restoration now. Also, as a young scientist, I have the first opportunity to do an assessment that got national attention and mattered. This was an assessment of oil spill effects. This was a few years following the famous Santa Barbara oil spill, and the Ford Foundation, as part of their energy policy project, had asked me to do this assessment. So it gave me the first time of pulling information from diverse resources together in ways that were policy relevant. And it also presaged activities which I got back involved in maybe 35 years later down in the Gulf of Mexico in the big oil spill in 2010. The oil and gas development has been a recurring theme. It comes back in my life. And during the 1970s, there was proposals to explore and develop oil and gas off of the mid-Atlantic coast. So got involved in benthic community assessments throughout the whole broad continental shelf. Gave me a real taste of what doing oceanography, that is work out in the open ocean, is all about, but also helped me understand the biogeographic context of this region. We were able to do, actually for the first time, some field experiments. Some worked, some didn't, out on the open waters of the outer continental shelf. I also had a great opportunity as, again, a young scientist to be among a group of oceanographers, American oceanographers, who were the first ones to go over and actually do work on Chinese oceanographic vessels when relations between the U.S. and China occurred. So I've been able to watch the Chinese science develop from where it was in those very early days to the present state. I went down in 1980 to take on a position of leading a new research institution on the Gulf of Mexico and Louisiana, my home state. And it taught me a lot about organizational management and talking with political leaders and decision makers, but it also injected me in some big issues of the day, and that continue to be of great significance. One, I was one of the team that co-discovered the so-called dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, a large area of oxygen depletion in the Gulf, and developed an understanding of what the causes were, the history of that phenomenon was. Also involved, because this is where most of it occurs, on offshore oil and gas development, some of the issues related to the discharges of produced waters, drilling muds, and things of that take place from offshore platforms. And as a result of that, then got involved in a national assessment, led a national assessment involving work in West Coast and Alaska, as well as the Gulf of Mexico, on what we knew about the long-term effects of oil and gas development throughout the world, actually. This had a number of effects on how the science was done and regulations were approached, for example, of how produced waters are regulated very poorly in the past and now more effectively over time. The big issue in the Gulf and Louisiana in particular is the deterioration of the Mississippi Delta, the dramatic loss of wetlands. So I was involved in pulling scientists, multidisciplinary scientists together to kind of assess the state of knowledge. And that really, again, provided some of the building blocks for where we are today in that big restoration effort. During this period, it also gave me the first opportunity to be involved in a National Research Council assessment. And I've done a number of these since then, and from the ones I started initially on marine environmental monitoring, national research strategies for coastal oceanography were among those that I was involved in participating in. When I came back to the Chesapeake Bay Area to be the president of UMCES in 1990, and that gave me experience in dealing with the higher education administration and management, dealing with the chancellor, other presidents, the board of regents. And also, I came committed to help strengthen our long-term commitment to integrating knowledge across disciplines and to make it more effectively applied. One of the things that is really unusual here in Maryland is I, in my position, sit on the Maryland Governor's Bay Cabinet. So regularly I meet with the department heads, the secretaries of Environment, Natural Resources, Agriculture, Planning, for example. And I'm the scientist at the table and expected to bring information and also bring back needs back to the scientific community. Tremendous experience. Here you see on this photograph, here on this slide, is a meeting that we had with Governor O'Malley when he was governor called Baystat. We would every month call those secretaries together and to assess some particular issues that needed to have decisions made. Very often, 2/3 of the time, I would say the governor himself was actually present. One of my other roles in the university system is I serve as the vice chancellor for environmental sustainability. This helps us advance not only our sustainable practices within the universities themselves, but also our educational programs that lead to a better awareness and understanding of the environmental challenges we face and the need to have more sustainable solutions, but also to better bring the expertise throughout a university system on issues of public policy. So when I came back to the Chesapeake Bay after being away for 10 years, there's a lot of things that developed. The Chesapeake Bay program had been developed and formalized. It had goals and a structure, and it made some changes, but it really wasn't an adaptive system in the context of what we'll be talking about shortly. It did recognize the growing importance or the critical importance of land-based activities and the need to solve those in order to improve the quality of the Chesapeake Bay. And however, I've also, in the 26 years that I've been back, we've seen the failure to meet these milestones, and now we're in a period of time when we have mandatory requirements that states do to meet goals of pollution reduction. We'll be talking about that throughout the semester. Got involved in bringing scientists together to address the important issues of the day. There was a harmful algal bloom outbreak. People got sick, fish died. And that led to so-called fusterias. It turns out it was more complicated than that, but it did lead to the first agricultural regulations to control non-point source pollution. Issues of controversies over blue crab recovery, the total maximum daily loads that are now imposed as part of our approach to bay restoration, and various times and issues related to oysters. It seems to be a very contentious issue. including a few years ago proposals to introduce non-native oysters to replace or be more effective than the Native American oysters, and continuing problems and challenges over oyster restoration and management. Just recently, in the last few years, also involved in another agricultural management regulation, the phosphorus management tool. We'll be using that as an example of the scientific interaction and how to provide advice and sound advice as we go through the various case studies. And back in the late 90s, also involved in global climate change issues for the first time. I was involved in 2 of the national assessments called for under the law, both called climate change impacts in the U.S., doing the marine and coastal sector, leading that effort. So that gave me a broader understanding and engagement and awareness and concern about the challenge of climate change. And then when it was formed in 2007, have led the Scientific and Technical Committee's effort on impacts for the Maryland Climate Change Commission, assessing impacts in Maryland. This report here is one we produced in 2008 called Global Warming in the Free State, sea level rise projections, and then also just more recently helping the Commission understand why we needed to make certain reductions in our emissions on a certain time frame and amounts in order to meet our responsibilities. And was involved in a National Academy effort called America's Climate Choice. And we'll be talking about that when we talk about climate change. I've led assessments not only here in the Gulf of Mexico and Louisiana wetlands, but Florida Bay and the Everglades. Harmful algal blooms nationally, was one of the scientific advisors for 2 national commissions that provided recommendations concerning ocean policy. Called in by the nation of Sweden to help them resolve some battles among computing scientists on the causes of eutrophication, nitrogen versus phosphorus, and have been now for a number of years an advisor to the Baltic nations on their science program. And we'll be mentioning that when we talk about the Baltic. Well, in 2010, of course, we had this big blowout in the Gulf of Mexico that got national attention. And a month and a half after it occurred, I was actually appointed by the president to serve as one of 7 members of the National Commission that was set out to understand the broad issues dealing with engineering, safety, intergovernmental coordination, and restoration related to that event. It's a very high profile. We had a short deadline and had to do a compelling report. Here in this photograph, you see me over there on the left of the photo as part of the briefing we had after we finished our report with President Obama and members of his cabinet. After that was called back into the court testimony, the case between the U.S. and BP that led actually to a settlement and then helped the agencies help craft the report that's the basis of the settlement agreement, what to do with the money in terms of the restoration that's required after that settlement. And have still continued to be engaged in the long-term science needs of the Gulf Coast region, as well as the science basis for ecosystem restoration. So the next chapter in my life is I'm going to step down as the president of UMCES later this year. That's why Bill is saying this is the last time that students will get a chance to pick my brain, if you will. I'm going to tie up some loose ends. I've got some unfinished papers, some of them going back to 30 years that I really owe it to the scientific community to see that those are published. Also, I've got 2 books in me that I want to do. The first is going to be on the Gulf of Mexico, and the next is in the Chesapeake Bay. And both are really going to focus on this role that science plays in making big decisions or not making decisions related to management, restoration of those systems, use, management, restoration of those systems. And I'm going to use the rest of my time while I'm still able to be a strong advocate for addressing climate change. So thanks very much, and I look forward to working with you throughout the semester.